Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Recovery Channel. This week, we're going to continue our discussion on character defects, or as I like to call them, coping skills I adopted that no longer serve me, or simply character traits. Hopefully, you've had a chance to start looking at your inventory and using that to write down the character traits that you'll be working on in Step 7. Last week, I mentioned a few times that digging down below the behavior or feeling to get at the underlying character trait is not easy. Personally, it took me a lot of therapy and self-help books to get below the anger, frustration, fear, self-pity, and bad behaviors to figure out what was causing them. We're going to spend more time with you on this because it's important. Understanding what's going on inside is helpful to staying sober, and it's critical for long-term serenity. These traits we're talking about are serenity robbers. They steal our joy. So our job is to identify them and then do something about them. So where do we start digging? Well, we have our inventory where we wrote down our resentments, fears, and behaviors. The items we wrote down are way up here in terms of our psyche. They're on the surface. How do we get down a couple layers to where they're coming from? I'm guessing you don't want to spend 15 years in therapy to figure that out before you move on to Step 7. So what we're going to do this week is try to give you a bit of a shortcut. We're going to throw out some ideas for what your character traits might be, based on what a lot of other addicts have come up with. We'll present the list of traits and then talk about what feelings and behaviors might result from these traits. Hopefully, that will give you some ideas for what your character traits might be. Now, before we jump into it, I just want to reiterate that this exercise is not easy. It's important, as I mentioned, because it helps us expose our demons and find serenity. But what I don't want you to do is grab onto a character trait and assume that you have it just because we say you might. We don't want you to own up to something that you don't actually own. So, as you start to think that maybe some of these traits sound like you, give it some deep thought and see if it really resonates. Does it feel like it fits? If it doesn't, don't force it. It's okay if you can only come up with 3 or 4 character traits. Trust me, there'll be plenty to work on. And I can tell you from experience, you're going to figure out more about yourself as you get some sobriety and learn to be mindful about your emotions, so more character traits will become evident with time. All right, one last thing before we get to the list. You've probably heard by now in the rooms that we focus on the solution, not the problem. I strongly believe in that little quip. Life is a lot better when we focus on positive things rather than the negative ones. So why are you harping on our issues so much? That sounds a lot more like focusing on the problem than the solution. Well, because we have to, for the moment. It's an unpleasant but necessary step in the process. We focus on our issues right now so we can free ourselves of them, or at least learn how to live with them. If we skip this step, we're going to continue to allow our shame, fears, and resentments to guide our decisions. So bear with me for a couple more weeks. I promise we will shift to the solution soon. Well, all right, I guess, but I'm watching you. Okay, enough with the disclaimers. Let's get started. What we're going to do is give you a list of 15 common character traits. Then we'll focus on a few of them and talk about the typical behaviors and emotions that go along with them. If you can relate with these things, you might have the character trait. Here is the list of 15, and then we'll dive into a few of them. Denial, impulsivity and compulsiveness, selfishness, dishonesty, arrogance and pridefulness, anger, judgmentalness, laziness, blaming others, closed-mindedness, impatience, irresponsibility, resentment, self-pity and victimhood, and self-loathing. A more complete list is in the comment section. Now, of these 15, we're going to pick 5 of the most common and detrimental to your recovery, and talk about those in more detail. Denial. This one is so important that the program actually devotes the first step to it. We aren't going to go anywhere in recovery if we're in denial, which makes sense, right? If we can't admit that we have a problem, then there's nothing to fix. But it goes beyond just the first step. It's easy to slip back into denial about a number of things, including our character defects. You might be in denial if you find yourself saying things like, I don't know what the big deal is, it's not that bad, or so-and-so is way worse than me, or I don't know why everyone keeps saying I have this issue, they're the ones with the problem. Like we talked about in week 3, it's hard to know if you're in denial when you're in denial, so it's important to set aside pride and shame and be honest with yourself about this one. Relating this back to your inventory items, denial could actually be a trait based on what you left off of your inventory. If you find yourself about to write things down and then you talk yourself out of it, that could be a sign of denial. Impulsivity and compulsiveness. First, a quick definition of the difference. Impulsivity is all about instant gratification without any thought given to the consequences. Compulsivity refers to uncontrollable urges to do things repeatedly that ultimately serve no logical purpose. In the world of addiction, they might as well be the same thing, which is why we put them together. If you've got behaviors on your inventory that you find hard to explain in terms of why you did them, or you did them at times that were really dumb, like, smoking pot right before your ultra-conservative in-laws were coming over, you probably have this one. Most addicts do. Arrogance and pridefulness. Acting like you're smarter than everyone else, that you know better, is definitely going to hinder you from learning something that might help you in your recovery. We're going to spend a whole session talking about humility in a couple weeks because being humble is how we open ourselves up to healing. Arrogance and pride are major blocks to recovery, and they're also common in addicts. If you find yourself judging others, pointing out their flaws, always needing to be the center of attention, unwilling to listen or compromise, acting entitled and expecting special treatment, always needing to be right, feeling superior to others, you might have this one. Now, arrogance is often a result of insecurity, so look at how you act on this one rather than how you feel. Self-pity and victimhood. I can't tell you how many groups I've sat in where someone goes on and on about how unfair life is, how they've been mistreated, how the world seems to be out to get them. Never mind that they cause 90% of their issues. I was definitely guilty of this one myself. Why can't my wife just trust me? Why does she treat me like a child? Oh, I don't know, Phil. Maybe because you lied to her face for 10 years? This one is very easy to spot in other people, but not so easy when it's us. You might have this one if you find yourself blaming everyone else but yourself for your problems, if you spend a lot of time complaining or feeling sorry for yourself, or if you think that other people do what they do just to hurt you rather than for their own reasons. Self-loathing. This is closely related to low self-esteem, but it's more specific. Strictly speaking, it means you hate yourself. But the behaviors that stem from self-loathing aren't necessarily obvious. Symptoms include critical self-talk, like, I'm an idiot, I'm such a loser, I hate who I am, always feeling insecure around other people, neglecting your health, self-sabotage or self-destructive behavior, the inability to receive compliments, like when somebody compliments you, kind of don't believe them, self-isolation, victimhood, self-defeating mindsets like, oh, what's the point, or I'm not capable, and hopelessness. Think about if these things apply to you, and if so, you might suffer from self-loathing. Well, thanks for another uplifting video recovery channel. I think y'all should call yourself the I think I'd like to go jump off a cliff now channel. Like I said, we need to get through this to get through this. And like I've said many times, our addiction, and by extension these so-called defects of character, aren't things we ran down to the local mall to pick up because we thought they'd be nifty things to have. As you go through and identify your character traits, be careful about falling into shame. You're not a bad person, and you do deserve happiness and serenity. We'll be done with this unfun process soon, I promise, and then we'll turn our efforts on how to feel better about ourselves and start changing those character traits that we don't like and are no longer serving us. Okay, your homework is to take a look at the comments section and see if any of the character traits we've listed look like they might apply to you. Don't worry about getting it right or wrong, just do the best you can. Write them down on your inventory worksheet next to the items that they apply to, or just put them at the bottom of the sheet. When you're done doing that, I want you to reread those positive traits you listed on the first tab of your inventory and do this out loud. This is important, don't skip it. Remember, we're working on these negative character traits because we want to find healing and freedom from them. They are not who you are. They are not who you are. Who you are is that list of positive traits you wrote down before you started your inventory. You got that? Yeah, I guess. Can I go now? All right, kids, that's it for today. Next week, Chris is going to talk to us about finding serenity, which we could all use about right now. We are at week 26, exactly halfway through, and this is a major turning point in the program. You've made it through the hardest part, at least in my experience. Stay well, stay strong, and stay sober. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.